Roughly a year ago, I reviewed the Oppo Find X8 Pro and I found it to be quite a compelling option, although it wasn't quite flawless. Step forward its successor, the Oppo Find X9 Pro. This indeed has a few different upgrades, and at the time of filming and in the UK, it can be found for £1,099, and here you'll find 512GB of internal storage and also 16GB of RAM. Now in this review you can see if this is actually worth its price tag, how it compares to some of its competitors, and of course if it is a real upgrade over the previous generation model. So let's kick things off and talk about its aesthetics, and here I don't really think it stands out over some of its competitors, in that it's got a somewhat bland look to it. Still, I really do rate it, namely when it comes to practicality. At the back it doesn't attract any sort of fingerprints, and it's also got a somewhat non-slip design. Furthermore, it's available in two nice colours, silk white or the pictured titanium charcoal, at least at the time of filming and in the UK. Now what really stands out more than anything is the fact that you have got a customizable snap key. That's a physical button that's found at the top left hand side of the smartphone. This takes you as a default to the AI mind space, allowing you to save certain voice notes or allowing you to have a certain AI summary at a glance. Handy for certain individuals, I'm sure. However, for someone like myself that doesn't want to utilize it, here you can actually customize it. Changing it to, for example, the voice recorder, the flashlight, the camera, the translation, or screenshots, or furthermore, what I really do love is changing the sound profiles. By holding it down, you can go between the default ring, vibrate, or indeed silent profiles. A really nice touch by the manufacturer. Speaking of which, you've also got the quick button, which is located at the bottom right hand side of the phone, and this allows you to not only launch up the camera quite quickly, take certain photos, but also adjust the zoom levels, at least when you're in the landscape mode. Again, a really nice touch by the manufacturer, and given the fact that this also does serve a purpose, I do suspect a lot of individuals will actually appreciate it. Certain things over here that you will not see in rival alternatives. Now moving on from the haptic enabled touch sensitive slider on the right hand edge, you'll find a power button and a volume rocker, which really do feel the part thanks to the use of premium materials. Towards the bottom edge you'll find a USB Type-C port and also a dual nano SIM tray. Here there's also eSIM capabilities in case you're wondering. Furthermore, there is also two cutouts when it comes to the speakers, one of which is located at the bottom edge and the other one just above the display. The combination actually does yield for good sort of audio reproduction across the sound frequency range, and one that actually gets pretty loud as well without any sort of distortion. It's great to see that you've also got customizable EQs that can be selected via the software as well. Now aside from all of this, it's good to see that you've got IP66, 68 and 69 ratings, therefore giving you some extra peace of mind with dust and water resistance. Furthermore, it's good to see that it weighs in at just 224 grams, relatively lightweight for a flagship device, and it also has a thickness of just 8.25 millimeters, therefore making it quite useful for one-handed operations. Elsewhere, you've also got a 3D ultrasonic fingerprint sensor. It's also very conveniently placed, meaning therefore, again, if you're going to be using the smartphone with a singular hand, it won't be an issue whatsoever. It's very easy and quick to unlock your smartphone. If, however, you do want to have biometric data, for example your face, you can also add it in. Although it's worth bearing in mind over here, it won't be as secure as using a regular PIN or password, or of course your fingerprint, as it does not use 3D face biometric data. Now this does actually perfectly bring me onto its display, and here you've got a 6.78-inch AMOLED with an LTPO technology, therefore giving you 1 to 120 Hz refresh rate range, which is absolutely fantastic. Not only does it feel fluid, but also very snappy. Furthermore, it's also got 10-bit color depth, Dolby Vision, HDR10+, and HDR Vivid support, therefore meaning the colors actually do look the part. It also does get blindingly bright. In the auto mode and ramped all the way up, I noticed a peak of 1030 nits, while in the maximum mode, and therefore with the auto mode disabled, it went up to 922 nits. That's actually the highest that I've ever recorded to date on a smartphone. And yes, I had no issues whatsoever in bright sunlit conditions, even at roughly 60 to 70% brightness, which is the same that could be said about a lot of the alternatives. Furthermore, it's got a fantastic range going all the way down to 1.16 nits, therefore meaning that even in a completely pitch black environment, it's not going to give you any sort of eye strain. On that note, you have got 2160 Hz PWM dimming, and that is only present under 70 nits brightness. And above that, you'll have DC dimming. In other words, you have got good sort of eye strain technology and also a low blue mode, which you can enable via the software. So while its display is certainly very impressive, what about when it comes to its camera setup? Well, at the back, you've got a tri-lens configuration with a wide Sony LYT-828 sensor, which has got a 50 megapixel count, an aperture of f1.5 with OIS and Ultra XDR. Then you've got the ultra-wide lens, which has got a Samsung 5K JN5 sensor with a 50 megapixel count and an aperture of f2.0. And then the Hasselblad telephoto Samsung S5 KHP5 sensor with a 200 megapixel count and an aperture of f2.1. It also has got OIS, 3x optical zoom and 120x digital zoom. The manufacturer even claims a lossless zoom of 13.2 times. And then you've also got the true color camera lens at f2.4, which supposedly gives you better color reproduction across the board and tries to bring all the lenses into tune with each other. However, from my own test, this seemed to be actually the complete opposite. While doing them and indeed going between the different zoom levels at under 3 times, it actually provided a better sort of warmer reproduction, which were actually a lot better. However, while going up the scale over, for example, 3 times zoom, I noticed that there is a much more cooler tone. Hopefully here you'll agree with me and be able to see the differences for yourself. They're actually pretty extreme to say the least. And I'm actually very surprised and somewhat disappointed that no other reviewers actually pointed this out. Now, it could very much be linked with firmware, although I did actually update my smartphone and it didn't seem to have a massive impact in terms of the overall color tones. So hopefully Oppo can actually address this and other reviewers can actually comment in terms of what they've actually experienced with it. Now, elsewhere, I did also notice that the phone in low light conditions with the ultra wide lens selected also had some tremendous trouble in terms of focusing. Now, yes, this photo was taken while tapping to focus and the phone completely had a meltdown. So much so that I had to go out of the ultra wide lens and back in, and therefore it fixed the issue. Lo and behold, I don't know why this actually occurred, but yet again it seems like software gremlins are creeping in with an Oppo phone like it did in its predecessor. Now, with those complaints aside, and of course certain things that could potentially be updated via future firmware update, the overall camera quality that this phone was able to reproduce is absolutely stunning. The 200 megapixel Hasselblad ultra clear mode actually does do an absolutely stonkingly good job. Not only in terms of grabbing a good amount of detail, but also really do providing a fantastic sort of color reproduction. And yes, even with the comments that I made before. This is because the Hasselblad mode is a separate mode in comparison to the normal lens mode, which therefore goes through the scales. And therefore you're limited in terms of the overall zoom levels that you can achieve via the Hasselblad mode. Now, in terms of even the normal camera lens, I was actually really left jaw-dropped by its overall performance. In normal lighting conditions, the overall tones look actually pretty good, and furthermore, the amount of detail that the lenses actually are able to capture are actually phenomenal. Now, on top of this, you've also got full manual controls thanks to Master Mode. This will effectively give you raw shots that you can therefore edit later on, or indeed for you to tinker around with the overall controls that you actually have. It's really nice thinking by the manufacturer for those people that really want to go that extra step further. Now, this is all combined with the Lumo imaging engine, which tries to do its best in terms of giving you the best sort of image reproduction. Now, in terms of the overall low light photography, I was also left pretty impressed, although it's not exactly jaw-dropping specifically when it came to its zooming capabilities. See, here you have got AI, which is also enabled by default, but of course you can disable it if you so wish by a tap of a button, and this will be in effect over 60 times zoom. I do think the overall zoom levels are very good, although I don't suspect a lot of people will be going to that level and then also expecting the best results. Here it is indeed a little bit limited, of course, if you do not go for an extra lens. And by that I mean, here you've also got the ability of adding an additional lens to the smartphone. There's an additional accessory, and it's something that certain people might want to consider, namely if they're zooming in or indeed taking photography to a next level. I wasn't able to test this for myself in person, but from what I've seen online and from what the manufacturer is claiming, it certainly does have its perks and seems to be pretty easy to initialize and also set up, and therefore gives that extra degree of functionality for those people who are seeking it. Now swapping over to the selfie camera, you have got a Samsung 5K JN5 sensor with a 50 megapixel count, an aperture of f2.0 with autofocus. It's actually really impressive, not only in terms of the amount of detail that it can get, and also in terms of the portrait modes, which seem to do a good job in terms of blurring out the background without seeming too jagged in terms of the edges, but also because the low light performance was absolutely stunning, both in terms of using it without the night mode or indeed the built-in flash mode. The camera was able to capture a good amount of light and also detail. Enabling night mode and also the flash mode, which effectively lights up your screen, will give you the best sort of results, at least in those low light shots. And therefore means that when it came to the different sort of scenarios that I was faced in, I was actually left really impressed by the overall selfie camera. Now better still are its recording capabilities, something that I've complimented Oppo in the past about, specifically in the Android world. And here it's good to see that both at the front and at the back you can shoot 4K at 60 FPS with also Dolby Vision, therefore giving you that extra bit of HDR. Furthermore, at the rear you can also shoot 4K at up to 120 FPS. And it's also up to 16 times digital zoom that is available. Now the overall stabilization is actually pretty good. It's not exactly the best out there in the market and isn't exactly going to be setting your world alight, but if you're going to be at a standstill and then, for example, panning left or right, you're not going to get sort of that jittery lines. And furthermore, if you're just going to be simply pacing up and down or going up and down stairs, it does a decent job in terms of stitching up the image with the combination of OIS and EIS kicking in. Now for those people that actually want to use it, there's also a pro video mode. Very much like the still photography capabilities, you can go that extra step further with full log capabilities. You've also got ACES certification, which gives you some extra peace of mind knowing that the colors are actually reproduced pretty accurately. Now in terms of the overall recording for the vast majority of consumers, the microphones will be important. And here you've got 4 of them that are dotted around the smartphone. They actually do a really good job and also don't sound tinny. Furthermore, they don't also sound one-sided either, that you'd find on certain other smartphones out there on the market. So here it seems like Oppo has actually thought about the overall recording capabilities of their smartphone and have actually done a pretty good job. Furthermore, I really do love its selfie camera, at least when it comes to recording. Here yet again you can shoot 4K at 60 FPS, and in low light conditions it actually does do a pretty good job, both in terms of the overall stabilization that it offers, and furthermore when it came to the fact that it was actually able to light up my face. And this is thanks to the fact that you've got that flash mode that can be enabled by lighting up the screen while also recording. So here, yet again, you have got good sort of color reproduction and also decent amount of stabilization. Combining all of this, and even in normal lighting conditions, it means that when it comes to taking videos for selfies, here a lot of people will be left actually pretty impressed. Now while some of these things aren't exactly a novelty, its MediaTek Dimensity 9500 chipset, which has got a 3nm manufacturing process, certainly is. Indeed, it's the first that I've actually seen in a smartphone. Now here you have also got 16GB of LPDDR5X RAM with also UFS 4.1 storage, therefore giving you good sort of speeds when it comes to transferring to and from the smartphone. Speaking of which, over here you've got a default of 512GB. And yes, some of the alternatives out there provide you an entry level of 128GB, which is actually quite laughable in this modern era. Now in terms of my benchmarks using Geekbench 6, I noticed a single core score of 3103 and a multi-core of 9421. Indeed, it's the best that I've recorded to date. However, in GFX Bench, I noticed a minimum FPS of 45 and a maximum of 324 FPS, which is indeed exactly the highest that I've recorded to date, including from its sibling that came before it. Now I suspect over here this is just due to thermal throttling. See, while I was utilizing the phone and also gaming for a prolonged amount of time, or indeed running intense benchmarks, I noticed the phone actually did get pretty hot. Looking around the internet, it doesn't seem like it's overly hot when it comes to looking at objective measurements, but clearly over here something is being done in terms of the software level to optimize the chipset performance and therefore prevent any sort of burn-in damage happening over time. And as a result of this, this will affect the overall performance that you'll be able to get, be in terms of the raw FPS that you can output, or of course if you're comparing and contrasting in terms of benchmarks in comparison to some of the alternatives out there. And this is despite the fact that the manufacturers even optimize the vapor chamber claiming that's even more advanced than the previous generation model and therefore get better cooling. Suffice to say over here that the phone does get a little bit toasty, but it's not uncomfortable to hold, even if you are a serious gamer. But yet again, just something I thought I should point out when it comes to the overall thermal throttling and capabilities of the overall chipset performance, namely for those people who are looking for it. Now, aside from benchmarks and hardcore gaming, when it comes to using the smartphone on a day-to-day basis, the ColorOS 16, which is built upon Android 15 and is shipped out the box, at least at the time of filming, is really buttery smooth. Unlike the older generation model, I didn't encounter any sort of firmware glitches or indeed any sort of random restarts. The phone itself felt really rock stable. You've also got plenty use of customization and a bunch of AI tools which are built in. Some of which of course you can enable or indeed disable if you want them all to be off. So yes, the manufacturer does provide you that option. Furthermore, you've also got a few bloatware apps, but thankfully they can be easily uninstalled and therefore means that you can have a bit more of a cleaner Android experience after installing and indeed doing the initial setup. Now the software itself is actually very fluid and the phone feels extremely snappy. No surprise given the fact that you have got that pretty flagship chipset that is housed within it. In terms of the connectivity options, you've got Bluetooth 6.0 with some of the major codecs supported and Wi-Fi 7, which therefore means that you can get lightning speeds at least over a supported router. So next up we get onto one of the key selling points, at least in my opinion, and that is its battery life. See, here you've got a whopping 7,500 milliamp capacity. This is thanks to silicon carbon technology that's been utilized, and the manufacturer claims that it's providing one of the highest percentage of silicon, which sits at 15% in this smartphone. Now in terms of my controlled benchmarks, I netted a whopping 37 hours and 11 minutes. Indeed, that pretty much blows everything out the water, and I can't think of a singular smartphone that comes remotely close. This will easily last you over 2 days of light to medium usage, and if anything, you can probably get roughly 3 days of usage from it. If you're a heavy user, I'd accept a roughly 1.5 days to 1 day, which is still actually really good to say the least. Now furthermore, the manufacturer is backing up the phone with a claim that you'll get over 80% of battery life after 5 years of usage, which by that point you're probably going to be looking to upgrade anyway. So it's good thinking by the manufacturer that they've also thought of the longevity of the phone despite the overall technology that's been utilized. Now in terms of the overall charging capacities, however, they're a little bit capped, at least if you compare and contrast it with some of its key competitors. Here you have got the SuperVOOC technology, which will give you up to 80 watts of wired charging capabilities. If you were to use a regular PD charger, it will go down to roughly 55 watts. Still very fast, and I do think it will suffice for the vast majority of consumers. Going from roughly 0 to 100% will take you around 1 hour, if not a little less. You have also got reverse charging capabilities with up to 10 watts, and you've also got wireless charging capabilities of up to 50 watts, of course with a relevant charger. So with all that in mind, what do I make of the Oppo Find X9 Pro? Well, I really do think it ticks a lot of boxes. And while it isn't quite flawless, I do think it's a stonky good smartphone. Let me summarize. You have got a fantastic design, and while it doesn't exactly stand out over some of its rivals, it is very practical in that it doesn't attract fingerprints, and has also got some physical buttons which are conveniently placed, and also somewhat customizable, which is very much appreciated. Then you've got a very vivid and bright display with that LTPO technology giving you a range of 1 to 120 Hz. And it's also got certain features such as the motion sickness feature that can be enabled and therefore giving you even better peace of mind. Furthermore, you have got a fantastic set of rear cameras which actually do a tremendous job both in normal and low light conditions. And yes, there is a little bit of a color tone shift that can be noted as you go up the zoom levels, although hopefully this can be fixed via future firmware updates. Then you've also got a really capable selfie camera which will capture a lot of detail and also does well in low light conditions. And furthermore, the recording capabilities are also pretty good, specifically for an Android phone. Now the real kicker over here is that its chipset performance is absolutely great to see, and while it does have a little bit of thermal throttling, its battery life really does set itself aside from any of the other smartphones that I've ever seen. Indeed, the 7500 milliamp battery really does give you that fantastic capacity and that real all-day usage. And sure enough, its overall charging speeds are somewhat capped. I still do think it will suffice for the vast majority of consumers. Now, given all of this and its overall price tag, and of course considering what else you can find out there on the market, I can certainly see myself recommending it, and as such it easily gets my Best Buy award. Now of course, as I've highlighted throughout this review, it's not quite flawless across the board. But still, I do think it's a great smartphone and one that you should seriously consider. However, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below, and if you would pick it over some rival alternatives. If you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification. All of which would be greatly appreciated and it will allow me to continue delivering honest reviews like this one. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.